We started a project, I guess, about 3 years ago at MIT, where we had a newly established lab. We had a relationship with Twitter, so we had access to the Twitter fire hose and access to the social graph of Twitter, and decided we wanted to understand kind of the intersection of mainstream news coverage and conversations on Twitter around kind of big events, and kind of looked ahead and said, what would be a good event to use as a case study? How about the presidential elections? And so that's how this began. And then the Knight Foundation.
Lucky choice.
Yes, it was a lucky choice. The Knight Foundation learned what we're doing and asked if they could get involved, and they introduced us to some newsrooms. We ended up partnering with the Washington Post. And the idea was to use machine learning, indeed, to analyze content of tweets, analyze the content of stories, find every tweet that we could that our algorithms thought were about the elections. And in particular, we wanted to sort of sort by issues when people are tweeting about whether it's gun control or abortion. We worked with Washington Post to establish a set of categories. We trained machine classifiers to find those tweets and those stories that were about those issues and create a kind of organized view. And every day, as millions of tweets and stories and thousands of stories would roll into our processing pipeline, understand those patterns. So actually, I'll bring up just one quick set of visuals. And this will give you a sense. The story that you read, which was in Vice News, and kind of learn about this work, was after the elections are over. And if anyone's interested, if you go to electome.org or to the Media Lab site, you can see a lot of the work we did with Washington Post and other newsrooms. That was really looking at ebb and flow of attention on Twitter versus news around the issues. What happened after the election is we started looking at the network of connections of people who are actually tweeting. So this is a sample of about 1 million. Whoops, let's go back. Sorry, this just flipped through to the end. Okay, so, well, I guess we're not quite. Okay, let's hold it right there. So that is an image of a sample of about 1 million people on Twitter that were actively tweeting during the elections. This is a snapshot taken in September of 2016. And what you're seeing here is, in particular, the mutual follow graph of people on Twitter that were tweeting about the elections and following each other, which tends to correlate with people who know each other. And what we discovered, and the color coding here is actually showing this kind of tribe membership, which we defined by looking at who each user was actually following amongst all the candidates. If they only followed Donald Trump, we code them as red. If they only followed Hillary Clinton, they're shown in blue. Magenta, the big block there, are people who are following Trump and Clinton. And then in green, there's actually kind of two distinct clusters, are people who were active around the elections on Twitter and following Bernie Sanders. So a couple of things I'll just note here. One is, this was a snapshot taken 2 months after the conventions were over. So this is in September of 2016. And there were 3 tribes left standing, not 2. It was a very distinct and separate set of Sanders followers. Second thing is, the shape of the entire network is being determined by an automatic algorithm that's trying to place any any group of users who have a lot of connections with each other closer together. So there's no other meaning in the shape. If there was literally just a major left to right a kind of dimension to how we were sort of politically organized, this graph would more or less have a linear structure. The fact that it's wrapping around itself is because there's a lot of people who were in the Sanders tribe that had personal links to people in the Trump tribe. That leads us to think about a second major dimension that's creating this kind of wraparound. You might call it a insurrectionist to institutionalist dimension, separate, orthogonal to left or right. The structure of the red tribe, there's a lot more social cohesion, a lot more interconnections. This is deceiving, but the number of members of the Clinton tribe, defined this way, is roughly equal to the Trump tribe, but there are very few connections between the users. So it's a much more diffuse structure as a result.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we can get this last slide up now, I guess the animation's not working. I'll just describe the last point that was in the Vice News piece. Since we were also tracking news coverage, we took a sample of about 30,000 journalists that had written at least one story about the presidential elections, and we found their Twitter handles, because most journalists are active on Twitter. And when we found them on this map, essentially they were all entirely along the major magenta trunk, and it sort of gave us a picture of what we all felt, this kind of divided, it's not just that they're tribes, but this real lack of connection between this major red tribe and all the journalists that were describing what was happening across America personally on the other side of this divide. And this kind of balkanized structure really started to catch our attention and has led to a lot of work that we've started doing since.